As you've been following along and learning, as we all have and do together here on FTS.com during this prophecy teaching series, it truly is remarkable how our Father God, the great Creator God, Yahweh, has put everything in order, including those prophetic words. And it's virtually impossible to doubt that he has a plan, a master plan for everything, everybody. If you've ever doubted that, let me tell you a story about the very technical, highly engineered dromedary camel. First of all, when it's hungry, it'll pretty much eat anything. Leather bridle, piece of rope, its master's tent, even a pair of shoes, doesn't matter. If it's hungry, it's going to eat. That's because its mouth is so tough. A thorny cactus doesn't even bother it. And they love to chew down on them. For that matter, they like to chow down on grass and all kinds of other plants that grow out there in the Arabian desert where they're found. A dromedary camel is the one-hump kind, right? Those are the ones that live on the hot deserts in the Middle East. That hump, which weighs 80 pounds, is filled with fat. It's not water in there, like a lot of people are led to believe. That's because Creator God, Yahweh, gave it to the dromedary camel because he knew that it wouldn't always be able to find food traveling across the hot sands of the desert. Now, when it doesn't find anything to eat, its body automatically takes fat from that hump and feeds its system, and that keeps it going long and strong. It's kind of its emergency food supply. If it can't find any plants to munch on, that body will use up the hump. And then when the hump gets smaller, it oftentimes tips to one side. And then all of a sudden, when it gets to a nice oasis and begins to eat again and drink, that hump will just build right back up to normal. By the way, a dromedary camel has been known to drink 27 gallons of water in 10 minutes. That's evidence of a master designer at work. In fact, it can't be anything but. That camel was made in that particular way by God, so that in a matter of minutes, all the water that it's swallowed travels to the billions of microscopic cells that make up its flesh. Now, naturally, the water it swallows first goes into the stomach, where their thirsty blood vessels just kind of absorb everything and carry it to every part of its body. Scientists have tested the dromedary's stomach and found it empty 10 minutes after it's drunk 27 gallons. In an 8-hour day, a dromedary camel can carry a 400-pound load 100 miles across a hot, dry desert and not stop once for a drink or something to eat. In fact, they've been known to go 8 days without a drink. But at the end of that time, they kind of look like they've really stood the test of time. In fact, they kind of look like a wreck. They will have lost in that amount, 8 days without a drink, up to 227 pounds, and their ribs show through the skin, and they look really terribly skinny. But you know what? They feel great. They look thin because the billions of cells lose their water, and that means they're no longer fat. The cells are flat. Normally, a dromedary's blood contains 94% water, which is identical to mankind. But when it can't find any water to drink, the heat of the sun gradually robs a little water out of its blood. And again, scientists researching this have discovered that a camel's blood can lose up to 40% of its water, and the animal will still be healthy. People couldn't do that. In fact, a person's blood has to stay very close to 94% water. If we lose even 5% of it, a person won't even be able to see anymore. If we lose 10%, we won't be able to hear. And if we lose 12%, the blood becomes as thick as molasses, and that means our hearts won't be able to pump the thick stuff. And that means the heart's going to stop. And you're dead. But that's not true with the camel. Why? Scientists say a camel's blood is different. The cells, the red cells, are elongated. People's red cells are round. Maybe that's what makes the difference. And it also proves that the dromedary was designed for the desert, or the desert designed for it. Did you ever hear of a design without a designer? Now, after the dromedary finds a water hole, it'll drink for about 10 minutes, and that skinny body starts to change almost immediately. In just that short time, 10 minutes, the camel's body will fill out quite nicely, and it won't look skinny anymore. In fact, it gains back the 227 pounds that it lost, and it does it in 10 minutes. Now, even though it does lose a lot of water on the desert, the body of a camel conserves it as well. Way in the beginning, way back there, when Father God, the intelligent engineer, made the dromedary camel, he gave it a very specially designed nose, which saves water. How it works is that when the camel exhales, it doesn't lose much water. In fact, the nose traps the warm, moist air from the camel's lungs and absorbs it into its nasal membranes. And then tiny blood vessels in those membranes take that back into its blood. How's that for a recycling system, huh? That's pretty sweet, huh? It works because a camel's nose is cool. That cool nose changes the warm moisture in the air from its lungs into water. But how does the nose get cool, you say? I'm glad you asked, I'll tell you. Because it breathes in the hot, dry desert air, which goes through the wet nasal passages, which produces the cooling effect. And the nose stays as much as 18 degrees cooler than the rest of the camel's body. And it loves to travel all over the sand dunes, which it does really quite easily because God gave a camel very specially engineered sand shoes for feet. The hooves are very wide, and they get even wider when they step on them. Each foot has 2 long, bony toes with tough, leathery skin between those soles. It's kind of like webbed feet, which, of course, don't let the camel sink into the soft, drifting sand of the Arabian desert, which is good because, quite often, the camel's master wants it to carry him 100 miles across the desert in just a day. Camels can go about 10 miles per hour. I guess that's kind of like jogging to them. Now, sometimes there'll be a big windstorm that comes out of nowhere on the desert with all kinds of flying sand. Well, guess what? Father God took care of that too for the camel by putting special muscles in its nostrils that close the openings, which keeps sand out of its nose, but still allows the camel enough air to breathe. Its eyelashes, the camel's eyelashes, arch down over its eyes, just like screens, which keeps the sand and sun out, but still lets the camel see clearly enough and where it's going. If a grain of sand would somehow slip through and get into a camel's eye, God took care of that too, because he gave the camel an inner eyelid that automatically wipes the sand off its eyeball, just like a big old windshield wiper. Some people think a camel is conceited, looks down its nose literally at everything else, because usually they're walking around with their head held high and their nose up in the air. But that's just because of the way God made the camel. Its eyebrows are so thick and bushy, it has to hold its head high to peek out from underneath those eyebrows. However, they are that way because they shade their eyes from the bright sun of the desert. Desert people depend on camels for all kinds of things. Not only is a camel their best form of transportation, but it's also kind of their grocery store, because female camels give very rich milk that people make into butter and cheese. They shed their thick fur coat once a year, and that can be woven into cloth. And a few young camels are used for beef. For a long time, camels have been called the ships of the desert because of the way they kind of sway from side to side when they trot. Actually, some of the riders of camels have been known to become seasick because of that motion, that swaying from side to side. But that's the way the camel's legs work. Both legs on one side of the camel move forward at the same time, which elevates that side. And then that left, left motion makes the rider kind of feel like they're in a rocking chair, except it's going sideways, not back and forth. At the age of 6 months, a camel's special knee pads begin to grow on the front legs. That's because God knew that the camel would have to have them. It helps them lower their 1,000 pounds of body weight to the ground. And if they didn't have those specially lined knee pads, the knees would really become sore and infected, and probably never allow a camel to be able to lie down, and then they would die of exhaustion. By the way, those dromedaries, the camels, don't get the thick knee pads because they fall on their knees. They fall on their knees because they've already got the tough knee pads. Obviously, somebody very amazing, very magnificent, and very great thought of all of this ahead of time to provide for the camel. Father God knew the camels needed them. He designed them right into their genes. It's really difficult for me to understand how some people say that camels, or anything else for that matter, evolved into what they are now. Camels are a very highly technical, highly engineered species. Things like that just don't happen. They're planned on a drawing board by someone brilliant, someone very intelligent, someone very logical. John 1 verse 1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God."